Good morning, good morning, good morning. So far, I hope you can see that the initial stages of story development are all about keeping an open mind and investigating everything your imagination gives you and going happily off down every rabbit hole your mind gives you, interrogating everything. What if, then what? Just butterflying around and enjoying your imagination, right? This is the fun bit. This is the creative bit. No rules, no structure, nobody else. Just you and your creativity driven by your inspiration. But what do we do next? Okay, well, as we find events and characters that resonate strongly, we start to examine them for 5 key indicators that a story is here and that it has power and potential that's worth putting your time into. So, firstly, we're looking for a character with a journey, okay? And ideally that character will experience some sort of change or transformation across the course of that journey. So as we stand in Mayakin, we have clearly a protagonist, to my mind, who's beginning to look like it's Samsonov, okay? He's betrayed at the beginning of our story and left for dead. However, by the end of the story, some 45 years later, he's going to get his revenge and he's going to live happily ever after. So there's a very clear character with a journey of positive growth. So there's no doubt we have a clear indication of story potential in this first element. Okay, big ticks there. You need at least one character whose journey and choices take them up the ladder of life, moving to the positive or down the ladder of life, shifting to the negative across the course of the telling. Excellent. So next we look for evidence of conflict in the context of this journey. Okay, if a character can simply make that journey from A to Z and win out and get fulfillment for themselves with no problems at all, well, that's not really a story. It's just a diary at best. So what's getting in Samsonov's way in achieving his ends? What forces of antagonism is he going to have to overcome? Well, at the beginning of our story in the 1980s, he's tormented, he's mentally unwell. Right? He's unable to function effectively in getting the revenge he desperately wants. So there's clear conflict here in how he could possibly achieve fulfillment in getting revenge from this starting position. Okay? He has no tools, no resources, so we have internal conflict for Samsonov because he's lost his mind. And we have what's called institutional conflict in that he's locked up in an institution and can't move freely or activate any resources. And as we go into the war in his head, we see there is clear relationship conflict. Of course there is, between Samsonov and his nemesis, Mayakin. So very definitely we have conflict in this story. And this is a very good sign. Now, I know there are, of course, some stories that exist with little or no conflict, and I talk about all the 4 different levels and types of conflict, in fact 5 if you include stories without conflict, on my course. But in general, good, strong, full-length stories inevitably have conflict, and we'll talk about how to manage conflict in a later video. Good. And fourthly, I have a very good thing to get your hands on if you can at this stage, and that's called a key question dynamic. Okay? A key question dynamic comprises 3 clear beats in your story. It begins with what's called an inciting incident that occurs quite early in your character's journey that raises a question in the mind of the audience that will remain open across the widest arcs of your story until the climax of your story, when that key question is answered through the climactic action. Now, not all stories have a key question, it's not compulsory, but again, most stories do have a key question, and if you know what yours is, that's really handy. It frames your story and it grips your audience early because they want to know what the answer to that key question would be, and they're going to stick with it all the way to the climax to find out the answer. So you've got them hooked for the entire story with a good key question. And in the case of Mayakin, I clearly have a good key question. The inciting incident comes when Daniel discovers the general is going to die in the war in his head, and he begins to do whatever he has to do to prevent that death from happening. The key question is raised. Will Daniel save Samsonov's life? And that question is held open across the full course of the story and answered through the climactic action, which is presumably going to be the ultimate battle between Samsonov and Mayakin. But this time, after 45 years of trying, Samsonov will win out. So the answer to the key question, yes, Daniel will save Samsonov's life. Now, not exactly sure how that's going to happen, and things may change, and you might not see how it could happen now, nor can I. That's fine. It's early days. But I do know the big picture beats of my story that come with the key question, and that I want that to be my ending, a happy ending. I want Samsonov to win out. So I'm going to make it happen that way. Okay, I'm the god of my story. I can make it happen. And this is all powerful knowledge to have at this point. So things are looking very good in these early stages, and then over and above all of these things, I have the most important element of any story that's going to be powerful and have grip, and that's what's called the storification dynamic. So what's a storification? Well, storification is the process that happens in the mind of the receiver of your story when they turn your narrative, as they receive it, into meaning in mind for themselves. Okay, the process of storytelling is that you deliver a narrative and they turn that narrative into meaning in mind. Okay, it's called storification. It's the subtext, if you like, for the entire story. The process of storytelling isn't just telling people some truth, okay? If you think about Agatha Christie, she doesn't just come in and say, "The butler did it. Bye." Right? She creates a merry dance. What the storyteller does is abstract away from pure truth. Okay, your work is fiction, okay? And the audience has to interpret what they're given and figure out the meaning of every story event and the whole story. And when they do that, this is called storification. Now, my story is going to storify through the moral outcomes the characters reap from their actions. So it's storification through the moral argument. So to give you an example of a story with a moral argument is any children's story really, but for a reader of Little Red Riding Hood, they come out of that story understanding that small children shouldn't speak to strangers. That's the moral argument. It's not stated in the narration at any point, but it's the meaning derived when the narrative storifies for the receiver. Now, there are many other ways for a narration to storify. This is a complete list of all of the storification types, but don't worry about this because we're going to go through all of them as we go through this process, because it's really important for you to understand. Storification is the power in a story. It's always present in a great story. But for the moment, I just want you to recognise that my story will have this moral argument at its core. Okay, it's going to define my story. My story will argue that your actions have consequences and that if you do bad things in the world, what goes around comes around and karma's going to get you. Okay, natural justice will be done. This is what I intend for my audience to take away from receiving my story. Now, that might not be true. You might not buy into that, but that's going to be the moral argument my story presents. Now, I'm very lucky to have my storification so early in the development journey. You're much more likely to be unsure about what your story is ultimately about until much further in, and that's fine. And that's also why I'm going to talk about storification in more depth later on. But have no doubt, you know you're on very strong story ground when everything in your story is either building up to delivering on the storification or it's an outcome of that storification. Because the storification brings your story cohesion, it unifies it. Okay, so if you think of Little Red Riding Hood, the storification is that small children shouldn't speak to strangers. And if you think about it, everything in the story is about a small child speaking to a stranger. That's it. Everything is either building up to her speaking to the stranger she shouldn't speak to, or it's an outcome of her learning this lesson that she really shouldn't be talking to strangers. Okay, so listen, we'll talk a lot more about storification as we go through these videos, but if you'd like to know more now and to go into greater depth, there's a link below. And you can go and sign up for a free Story Power mini course in which I'm going to go into more depth on many of the things we've been just scratching the surface of in this process so far. But I don't want this process to be about theory so much as developing the story of Mayakin. So that's just a glimpse of the 5 things that are giving me confidence that I'm sitting on a powerful story here and it's well worth pushing ahead with. And several of these things should be evident in your early story development if the story is going to be worth pursuing. Right, so in the next video, we're going to get back to building the actual story. I've had a fantastic revelation about Mayakin, who he is and where he is and what he's up to in the 1980s. So we're going to build that in and see where it takes our story and how it impacts the other characters. And we're going to look at the 5 questions you should ask all of your characters. We're going to sit them down and interrogate them with 5 questions and thereby get to know them and give them their own agenda and character and voice. Excellent. So I hope this has been useful to you. I hope you're enjoying it and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.